welcome back to my channel. This is Erica from Confessions of a Homeschooler, and I have this super cute drawstring backpack with this flap and button enclosure. It has these cute little canvas backpack straps on the back, and then of course there's a pocket inside. This bag is pretty beginner friendly. There's nothing too complicated in it, but I will walk you through step by step, so let's go ahead and get started with this tutorial. Supplies for this project are really simple. You'll need your basic sewing supplies. You'll need a button, some elastic, and I'm just using this Dritz 1/4 inch elastic that I got from my local craft store. You'll need 15 2.5 by 2.5 inch squares, or you could use a mini charm pack. You'll need some Fusible fleece, some cotton filler cord. You'll need some fabric for the lining and inside of your bag. You'll also need some fabric for the outside and some canvas for the bottom and the straps. All of the supplies are listed in the PDF download below, along with the exact cutting instructions. So just click the little show more link down there, click on that PDF link, and you'll have all the exact cutting instructions you need to go ahead and get started with this bag. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and start off with the patchwork flap just to get that prepared and out of the way. So just arrange your little squares in any order that you like, and we're gonna sew this row together, this row, and then we'll sew them all together so we have a nice patchwork section. The easiest way I found to do that is to keep everything in rows. So I'm going to take this second row and line it up right sides together along the first row. And then I'm going to take this to my sewing machine, and I'm just going to sew 1/4 inch down all three of these edges. I'm not going to cut my thread, and then I'll bring it back over here, open it up, and then add this row, and this row. And so in order to make that go a little bit faster, I'm going to just stack these up in order like so. And then that way, as soon as I'm done doing this, I can just grab this next stack and the next stack and the next stack. All right, so here's our first little strip sewn, and I'm just gonna open these up and grab my next pile that I have here and just keep on going. Okay, so here's our panel, and as you can see, I just left the stitches together so that I can move it around and it doesn't get out of order. And I pressed all the seams on this top row to the left, the middle row is pressed to the right, and the bottom row is pressed to the left. And so that way our seams will nest when we go to sew them together. So we're going to take this first row and just flip it onto that middle row. And then as you can see right here, this seam is kind of going to the left, the top seam is kind of going to the right. That's nesting your seam. So I just make sure they do that all the way down. And I'm going to just take my sewing machine and just sew 1/4 inch down this edge. Then I will open that up, flip this one up, nest my seams again, and sew 1/4 inch down this edge, and then we'll have our finished patchwork panel. And then, oops, get that out of the way. And then we're gonna flip up this side and just do the same thing. All right, so here's our panel, and I have just pressed it, and then I trimmed it to 6.5 by 10.5, and I always like to trim my patchwork panels just because there's so many seams they can get a little bit off. So next thing we're gonna do is prepare the actual flap itself. So we're gonna take our piece of fusible batting here, and this side, you probably can't see it on camera, but one of the sides is gonna be bumpy, the other side will be smooth. This is my bumpy side, so I'm gonna have the bumpy side up, which is the side that has the kind of adhesive on it, and I'm gonna place my patchwork panel down on top of it, and then just following my manufacturer's instructions, I'm going to go ahead and adhere this panel to my patchwork piece here, and that for the most part just means to press it with a hot iron, usually no steam, for about 10 to 15 seconds per section. And you'll know because when you go to lift up your fabric, it'll be adhered to it and you won't be able to separate the two. So I'm going to go ahead and do that really quickly. All right, so my panel is nice and secured. I can't pull these apart anymore. Now, this is totally up to you. You can just leave it like this and move on to the next step, or you can do what I'm gonna do, which is take it over to my machine and just run some quilting stitches, just straight stitch. I'm gonna do 1/4 inch on both sides of all of these seams, just to give it that classic patchwork look. But like I said, you used Fusible fleece here, so it's totally optional. You don't have to do this step. Okay, so here's my panel, and I've just done a nice quilting stitch 1/4 inch away from all the seams, so it has that nice patchwork look to it. The next thing we're going to do is attach our flap lining to the patchwork section. So we're going to take our patchwork piece, and we're going to take our little piece of elastic here, and we are just going to center it on our patchwork piece, kind of folded in half like that, and I'm just going to pin it in place with my needle kind of sticking out the edge here so I can pull it out. And then we're going to layer our lining piece right side down on top of that. And then we're gonna round the corners. You could leave these square if you want. I just think it looks a little bit nicer rounded. And I do have a template in my PDF, but I'm actually just going to use this little bucket to make my corners rounded. You can use anything you want. This has just a nice ring to it. So I'm just gonna place it right here on the corner. And then I'm just going to mark around that edge. Like that. Okay, so we've got one rounded, and then I'm gonna do the other one. The other two you're going to leave square. All right, so hopefully you can see here where I rounded the corners. The other two you're gonna leave square. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this over to the sewing machine, and we're gonna sew 1/4 inch all the way down this side, following 1/4 inch inside this curve, down this edge, around this curve, and up to the other side. You don't need to worry about this yet. That's going to get taken care of when we start assembling our bags. So now I'm going to take my rotary cutter and just cut right along those curves there. You can also use scissors here. Okay, and then now we can flip our little flap here right side out. Should be fairly easy to do. And then we're going to take it over to the sewing machine. Well, actually, then we're going to take it over to the ironing board and just press these seams nice and straight. And I'm just using this little Hera marking tool to press out my edges. I find that it really does a good job at that. I'm going to take it over to my ironing board and just give it a nice good press, and then I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and just run 1/4 inch all the way around this edge right here just to finish it off. And then just make sure your little elastic is not in the way. You don't want it to get caught in your stitch. Okay, our little patchwork flap here is finished, so we can go ahead and set this aside now. The next thing that I'm going to work on are the handles here. Now I am using the canvas, and I just want to show you that I go ahead and press up the short ends by 1/4 inch, and then I press up the long edges 1/4 inch, and then I press that whole thing in half. Okay, so we kind of have all of our raw edges handled. And then I'm just going to go ahead and take this over to the sewing machine and go up this side, down the open edge, down the short side, and then back down this folded side just for symmetry. And I'm going to do that to both of our straps. And you can also, of course, do it kind of the opposite way I'm doing it, where you flip it right sides together, sew along this edge, and then turn it. I don't like to do that, especially with canvas. I think it's kind of hard to deal with, so this is just my way of getting around having to turn it a long tube right side out. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll meet you back here. The next thing that I'm going to work on are the handles here. Now I am using the canvas, and I just want to show you that I go ahead and press up the short ends by 1/4 inch, and then I press up the long edges 1/4 inch, and then I press that whole thing in half. Okay, so we kind of have all of our raw edges handled. And then I'm just going to go ahead and take this over to the sewing machine and go up this side, down the open edge, down the short side and then back down this folded side just for symmetry. And I'm going to do that to both of our straps. And you can also, of course, do it kind of the opposite way I'm doing it, where you flip it right sides together, sew along this edge, and then turn it. I don't like to do that, especially with canvas. I think it's kind of hard to deal with, so this is just my way of getting around having to turn it a long tube right side out. So anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and then I'll meet you back here. All right, so both of our straps are done, and I just went ahead and pressed them really quick just to make sure that they look all nice and neat. We're gonna go ahead and set these aside. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna work on is the outside of our bag. So we're just gonna take one of our top panels and one of our bottom canvas panels, and we're just going to put those right sides together and just sew 1/4 of an inch along this edge, and we're gonna do that to both of them. All right, so both of our straps are done, and I just went ahead and pressed them really quick just to make sure that they look all nice and neat. We're gonna go ahead and set these aside. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna work on is the outside of our bag. So we're just gonna take one of our top panels and one of our bottom canvas panels, and we're just going to put those right sides together and just sew 1/4 of an inch along this edge, and we're gonna do that to both of them. All right, so I just went ahead and took my two panels over to my ironing board and just pressed them so they're nice and flat. And then now it's time to adhere our outside bag panels to our Fusible fleece. I'm just again gonna follow the directions on my packaging to adhere it. Again, the bumpy side is the sticky side. By the way, I just wanted to quickly mention, if you don't have Fusible fleece, you can totally use leftover quilt batting. That works just as good. But since it's not fusible, I would suggest that you do, some quilting to get the outside of your bag to adhere to your batting. So whatever you have on hand is totally fine. I'm gonna go ahead and adhere my Fusible fleece. I probably still do a little bit of quilting just to make the bag a little more fun. Okay, you guys, so here are my panels. I actually didn't get too crazy with it. I just did 1/4 of an inch on either side of this seam here. And I don't know, I thought this fabric was kind of busy enough that it kind of looked better without quilting, but you can do whatever you want to fit your fabric. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead now and set the outside of our bag aside. And now we're going to start working on the lining. The first thing that we're gonna work on is our inside pocket. And so we are going to turn our pocket, fold our pocket in half, right sides together, so that it's about 5 1/4, I think it is this way, and 8 1/2 this way. We're going to leave ourselves an opening down here by about maybe 2-inch opening, just so that we can turn our pocket inside out. And then we're gonna sew along the bottom edge and then up both sides, and then we're gonna flip our pocket right side out. Okay, so here's our pocket, and we're just going to turn it right side out. And like I mentioned before, this little hair marker is really handy. Just stick it in there, and then I can kind of use it to poke out those edges. Once I have it kind of poked out, then I'll use this side. Just be careful, this side will poke a hole through your fabric, so you just like to be nice and gentle when pushing out those points. And then I'm just going to take this over to my ironing board and just give it a nice press. I'm also going to just press in this opening, and it should kind of naturally fall at about 1/4 of an inch, but it helps to just give it a nice press. All right, so here is my pocket. I've pressed it. I'm just going to take it over the sewing machine and just run a quick stitch right down the folded edge. This is my open edge down here. I'm going to run this stitch along the top of the folded edge. That'll just give our pocket a little bit more stability. Okay, I just did that really quickly. You probably can't even see it, but I just think it gives the pocket a little more stability and it looks a little more finished. Now we're going to place our pocket on one of our pieces of lining, and I'm going to put mine, you can kind of center it wherever you want. Mine's 4 inches in from both sides, and then about 1, 2, 3, 4 inches down from the top. And I'm just going to take this over to my machine. I'm going to do a back stitch right here, so all the way down the side, across the bottom, making sure to close up this opening when I go across the bottom, and then back up the other side, and I'm going to do a back stitch right there. I'm also just going to put a couple pins in here so that it doesn't move around when I bring it to my machine. Alright, so my pocket is now attached. Make sure that your pocket opening is facing upward, and then we're going to place our other lining piece right side down on top of the first one. And I have directional print, so I'm just making sure mine is going the right way here. And then we're going to take this over to the machine, and we're going to sew down this left side across the bottom, stopping right about here. Pick back up right about here, so leave yourself about a 5 or so inch gap down here to turn the bag. Keep going, and then up the left side and leave the top open. Okay, so our lining is finished for right now. We're going to go ahead and just set that aside, and next we're going to work on the outside of the bag strapping, and this will be making a little bit more sense once we do the full assembly, but for now just bear with me. We're going to take 2 of our straps here, and we're going to, I'm actually going to put mine this way, we're going to put them on just the bottom of our bag. And so I'm going to place my straps approximately 2.5 inches in and 3.5 inches down. So like that. I'm just going to throw a little pin in there so it doesn't move around on me. And I'm going to do the same thing over on this side, 3.5 inches down and 2.5 inches in, and pin. Okay, and then I'm going to take these over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew a square with an X in it on both of them, and I'll show you how I do that. It's pretty simple. It's kind of more decorative, but it also gives the straps a little bit more durability and strength. So my straps are attached just down here at the bottom. They're totally loose up here at the top, and we'll take care of that in a minute. The next thing we're going to do is take our other piece of outside fabric and just lay it right side down on top of the one we just sewed our handles onto. And then just making sure that these handles stay out of the way, we're going to run a line all the way down the side, across the bottom, and back up the other side. And we're going to leave the top of our bag open. So sew down the 2 sides and all the way across the bottom. You don't need to leave an opening in this one. And whatever seam allowance you used on your lining, do the same thing for the outside of your bag. Okay, so here is our bag outside, and we have the top still open, as you can see. The next thing we're going to do is box the bottoms of the outside of our bag and of our lining, and we're going to do it the exact same way on all 4 pieces. And so how I do that is just stick my hands in all the way down here to the corners, and just make sure these straps inside are kind of out of the way. And then I use my chin to help me fold this in half. So we've got like this little talking mouth guy, fortune cookie, call it whatever you want. And then just straighten everything out, make sure everything's nice and straight. And the goal here is to line up this seam with this seam right here. So just make sure you can kind of feel them in there. Just make sure everything is lined up okay. And again, just make sure that these straps are pulled out of the way. And we're gonna go ahead and just fold this one back. Now we're gonna go ahead and box the bottoms of our corners. Now you can make your bag as boxy or not boxy as you want. You could even skip this step if you wanted. I'm gonna go ahead and box the bottom of my bag. And we're just gonna do that on all 4 corners, and whatever size you've made on the outside of your bag here, do that exact same size on your lining. Okay, so those 2 corners are done. Now we're gonna do our lining. Same way, I'm going to get my fingers into the corner there, fold it in half, and then just get everything straightened out. Again, I'm going to line up this seam with this seam. A little bit off. And I'm just going to do the same thing on my lining. I'm just going to use pins for this one because it's not as chunky. Just going to fold that one out of the way and do this one. Okay, and then we're gonna take all 4 of these corners over to the machine, and so directly on your line, I'm gonna back stitch at the start and at the stop, and then we'll cut it off 1/2 an inch away from our stitch line, and we'll do that on all 4 corners. Okay, so there's our boxed bottoms, and we're gonna go ahead and take our outside of our bag and turn it right side out. The lining we are going to leave inside out, and you can just press out those corners. Just make sure everything is looking good. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and set this aside for just a second. We are going to leave our lining inside out. We're going to set that aside for a second. All right, the next thing that we're going to do is prepare our drawstring pockets or casing. And so I'm going to fold in the short edges 1/4 of an inch and then another 1/4 of an inch, and take this over to the machine and just sew down these edges, and I'm going to do that on all 4 of these edges. Then I'm going to take it over to the ironing board and press it in half lengthwise like this, and then we can set those aside. Okay, so here are our drawstring casings. I just finished off these short edges and then folded them in half and ironed, pressed them, and then we can go ahead and set these aside. All right, you guys, it's time to start assembling our bag. So we're going to take our side with our straps on it and put that right side up, and then we're going to take our straps and make sure they aren't twisted, and we're just going to place them on this raw edge up here of the opening of our bag. And I'm going to put mine about 4 inches in from either edge of the bag here. And you can put a wonder clip just to keep them in place. The next thing that we're going to layer is our flap pocket. And so we want the right sides to be together and the raw edge at the top. So now I'm going to center my little flap pocket here on both sides of my straps, and you can measure if you want. It looks to me like it's about an inch, little over an inch on each side. And I'm just going to use that same clip and now include my flap. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is take one of our drawstring casing pieces, and we're going to place it with the raw edge or open edge up along this top edge as well. And again, I'm just going to use my same wonder clip to keep that in place. And if you'd like, you can throw a couple more on the edges over here. All right, so that's the entire side of this bag. We're going to flip this whole thing over and take our other casing piece here. Again, open edge or raw edge along the top here, and we're going to center it. And then I'm just going to place a couple of wonder clips to hold that in place. Okay, and now I'm going to flip this back over just because this side is the one with all of the stuff on it. So I want to be able to kind of handle, just finagle it easier from this side. We're going to leave all of this right side out like we have here, and we're going to place it inside of our lining. And I'm going to go ahead and put the pockets on this side. That way when we put it in the bag, the pocket will be on the same side as my flip. You can put it however you want, but we're gonna carefully squeeze all of this inside our lining. And we're gonna then line up these top edges up here and clip everything down. There's a lot of layers in here, so just take your time. And then I like to do both of the side seams first. So I'm just gonna line up these side seams, place the clip there. Then I'm gonna line up the other side and place the clip. And then I'm just gonna make sure everything's nice and straight. I'm gonna go ahead and use my existing clips to then clip in this lining. Just make sure you have all your layers in there. These Wonder Clips are great for projects like this. Okay, and then we're gonna carefully flip this whole thing over and clip it on the back side as well, making sure to get all of our layers. Okay. Now we're going to take this whole thing over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew all the way around this edge. I would go a little bit over between a quarter of an inch and a half an inch, somewhere in there, just to make sure that you get all of your layers. But don't go too far in or you'll be eating into your casing, and we need that space for our drawstring. Okay, now we can carefully turn our bag through our lining opening. And at this point you should have just one casing on this back side here, and then on the other side you'll have the casing, the flap, and your backpack straps. And now we're going to go ahead and just fold up this end opening right here, and I like to just kind of finger press it. It should already sort of naturally fold that way, but then I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine and just stitch right along this edge to close up the opening in our lining. Okay, I've closed up our opening here, and now we're going to go ahead and just tuck this lining down inside of our bag. And then I'm just going to take this whole thing over to my ironing board and just give it a nice press. And then I'm going to run a stitch a quarter of an inch all the way around the outside of this. Now when you're doing, when you get to this back side, you're going to want to just make sure these straps are out of the way. So you may have to stop and start here. Just make sure you don't sew your backpack straps in to your seam line there. Now I'm starting on the back side here, and I've just put this strap behind my presser foot and out of the way. Also make sure that your drawstring casing is up and not getting sewn into this seam as well. And we're just going to go ahead and stitch right along this edge. Just make sure everything's nice and straight and take your time. Okay guys, this is how our bag should be looking, and then the back side should be looking like this with our little flap right here. The next thing that we have to do is to just thread our drawstrings through this opening. And so I'm just using a relatively large safety pin here. And I'm going to take both of my drawstrings and we're going to put them through the first one together. So I'm just going to kind of thread it through there, close it, and then we're just going to go ahead. I'm going to do this back one first, and of course it's a little finicky, so just take your time. And now I'm going to release one of these, take the other one, and go back down the other side here. So now we've got cut this string, it's running that way, curving around and out the other side. So now we want to do the opposite with this other one. So this one needs to go back that way. There we go. Okay, now we can just take our two sides, and I just try and pull them so that the ends are even here, and then we just need to tie these in a knot. And this piece has a little tape on it. I will take that off and trim them up too, because this one got a little crazy while I was trying to fit it through. There we go. And then the last thing that we have to do is to figure out where we want our button. And so this little flap is going to come over just like this. And so we're just going to want to place our button somewhere right around there. Okay, you can put your button wherever you like. I'm just going to kind of eyeball it here and just hold on to my button. And I'm just using a couple of pieces of embroidery floss. And I'm just going to come up from the back here. And just don't pull your thread all the way through the back here. And go back down. And I'm just going to do that a couple times. There we go. And then I'll just turn this over on the inside here. And just tie it in a knot, and we're done. And there we go, we're done. You can hook your little elastic, and we have our nice little backpack straps on the back, and then of course our drawstring top. Alright guys, that's it for today's tutorial. I hope you enjoyed this one. As you can see, this bag was really nice and easy to put together. I'd love to see what you make. If you decide to make this bag, please use this hashtag right here so that I can see what you make with it. If you did like this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. That way I know to keep making tutorials like this for you. If you have any questions, you're also welcome to leave them in the comments section below, and I will get back to you. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time.